Well, hello, everybody, and welcome again to another episode of Meepleville Meets. Today, we've got quite a surprise for you because I would say that probably, arguably, or no, I'm just going to go ahead and say it. The most anticipated game coming out this year is Pandemic Legacy Season 0. And we are so proud and so honored to have the designer of that game with us today. Please welcome Rob Daviau. Hello, Rob.
Hello, how are you, Dad? Now I'm nervous about this game. I thought we were going to slip that one in under the wire. So,
no. Hey, listen, come on, man. You've got to admit it. I mean, it is like people are just chomping at the bit for this Pandemic Legacy Season 0 coming out. So,
I'm starting to suspect that. I mean, what happened was Matt and I started working on it in 2016.
Okay.
We're largely done in 2018 and then did a little bit of polish and have been done for about 15 months and signed off on all the graphic. Not that we get to sign off, but we're like, hey, these graphics look great, and did all the proofreading like October of last year. So in my mind, that game has come out and been done already, right? Like that people are excited now. I'm like, well, no, that was 2 years ago that we finished that.
And I remember that because when we were playing Pandemic Legacy at the Gathering, I had asked you about a rule, and you're like, man, it's been a while. I have to remember that.
Yeah, I know. I know people do that to me all the time. And I find other game designers because one, you by the time your game comes out, you're like 5 games past that. Right. And two, you go, okay, we had like 5 different rules for that. Which one did we end with?
Exactly. So let me go ahead. I want to kind of start there, right at Pandemic Legacy Season 0, because you said you started working on it about 2016. So do me a favor, and I want to know, like, when you did Pandemic Legacy, first of all, was right away there an idea? Like, how soon into the process were you guys like, okay, you know what? We're going to do a 2 and a 3 and sequels?
Not until the first one was done. We finished the first one in fall of 2014, and I actually drove the game up to Montreal. The publisher was in Montreal at the time, and because I'm in Massachusetts, and dropped it off. And the publisher said, "Great, we're going to call this Season 1. We think it's going to be big. You guys should do a sequel." And I was like, "Okay, I thought we were done here. Like, I thought this was like a cool project. Let's move on." And we took some time, Matt and I, and we started Season 2 about 6 months after we turned in Season 1, which is before it came out. Because at the time, I think they were almost like, can we do these every year? And then we realized no. So it was going to be every other year, but we had to get started. So by the time the first one came out, we were halfway done the second. And somewhere around like right when the first one came out, when we were in the middle of the second one, we said, well, how many of these are going to be? And we realized it should be a trilogy. And we sort of very top level thought of what Season 0 would be. I mean, we called it Season 3 at the time. Right. That was the publisher very cleverly, like a year ago, saying we're going to call it Season 0. Like, what? Oh yeah, no, that makes sense. And we sort of like thought it through, and we're like, okay, so we're at, Season 1 takes place in 2015 when you'd be playing it. Season 2 is 70 years in the future, and we're like, we can't go much further. Right. So we're like, well, let's do like an origin story. Let's do a prequel. And we're like, oh, that's pretty cool. And so we sort of just said, we don't know how it'll work, but maybe it's a little like this, a little like that. And by and large, the tone stayed the same when we actually got started on it. But we, all the details changed. So we didn't have details. We filled them all in. But the idea of sort of explaining the origin of, Pandemic or Pandemic Legacy and how it got started. So we had the idea on paper as like a 2-paragraph pitch for Season 0 right around the time when the first one came out 5 years ago.
Okay, so now you brought up an interesting point because you interjected the publisher in there, and I'm sorry, I'm gonna kind of jumping a little bit around here, but I just want to try to make sure there's a lot of information I want to get covered. So initially, here's a question that I know I want to know, and I'm sure there are a lot of people do. So Pandemic is Matt Leacock's game. You are like the legacy guy, and then there is the publisher. So who asked who to do this, and how did that all come together?
Yeah, I got very lucky is how it happened. I did Risk Legacy, and it came out in 2011, and I left Hasbro unrelated. Just the job moved and I couldn't follow it in 2012. And so I was like, well, I'd been at Hasbro for 14 years and done a lot of kids games. And the question was, do I stay in kids games or family games or sort of do more what I love? And can I make anything out of this Risk Legacy, which had done well? But I didn't really quite know what to do with it. About a year later at Gen Con 2013, Z-Man Games, who's the publisher, said, oh, hey, do you know Matt Leacock's looking for you? And I'm like, I know who he was, and I had played Pandemic, and I'm like, oh, and in my head I thought, well, maybe he wants to do like a Pandemic Legacy, but probably not. And so he wasn't at Gen Con, and I went home and promptly forgot about it, and then happened to notice my Pandemic game sitting on my shelf like a month later, and went, oh, I should try to contact him. Didn't have an email, found him on Twitter, and like just added him, and like, did you want to talk to me? And that's how it got started. Now I found out after that Matt had been meeting with Z-Man, early in 2013, and they talked about where Pandemic could go. And I think they talked about a dice game, which they ended up doing. And they talked about a few other things that I'm not privy to, or maybe didn't see the light of day. And one of the things Matt said was, oh, I really like the idea of a legacy game. I played Risk Legacy, and I think it would work well for Pandemic. And so we started working on a number of these to see which one would work. And I hope I'm not getting some of the details wrong, because it's Matt's story, not mine. But I think the gist of it is that he started working on the beginning of what would become January for Pandemic Legacy and said, I think there's something here, but maybe I should talk to, Rob Daviau and see if he wants to help me or give me advice or partner. Because I think there's a lot of things that I would have to learn that he already knows, and it might be a fun co-design. And so, in fact, he did want to work on. He's like, do you want to work on Pandemic Legacy? And I remember thinking, I don't know if Legacy would work as a co-op. I was 100% wrong.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, yeah, I'm starting up my business. Let's see where this goes. Maybe it'll be okay. It turned out to be very okay. So,
oh yes, no, it's fantastic. So without maybe getting into like, I don't want exact numbers or anything, but since it's like his game, and then you came on as a co-designer or whatever, how does like the breakdown work as far as, because you both get your name on the game, correct?
Yeah.
As the thing, but it's still, and so like he's the designer, so he gets like a bigger portion. You're a consultant, and then like how does sort of
we're a co-designer, so we design everything. Okay. We're co-designers, and we split royalties, and we both own it.
Okay.
It is a complete co-design, and when we sit down, we design the game together. What works, what doesn't work. I think people think that, maybe Matt does all the systems and I do all the writing, and we really design everything bit by bit, card by card, and go over systems and stuff like that. What I tend to do is I tend to manage the rule book.
Okay.
And he manages what we call the kit, which is this giant Illustrator file with all the cards and stickers and things like that. So when we go to make a prototype, I have the rule book up to date and he has the kit up to date. And, while we're working, and he was in California, I'm in Massachusetts, we're on a call like this. And, I got the rule book open and I'm making changes, and he's got the kit and he's making changes, and we're working in parallel. I think at the end of the day, I end up doing a little more of the fiction writing, such as it is in there, like the creative writing, but not all of it. I take a little more point on writing, and he takes a little more point on like the UI and the look of it. He's very good at, in particular with like how the board should be laid out, so the fold lines don't work and where the stickers go, and sort of really trying to help the graphic designer for the publisher not have to relearn some things, right? So he does a lot of usability and I do a lot of writing, but other than that, we are just 50-50 co-designing this game. And I might be able to look at any one of the games and say, I think that was my idea, or I think that was Matt's idea, but most of it is hours and hours of conversation where we sort of pitch stuff back and forth, and it's hard to say where the idea came from.
Right. No, I can imagine, because it's just phenomenal, which brings me up to, like, I'm going to ask you kind of a weird question here.
Good.
So I played Pandemic Legacy, binged it actually, and it was phenomenal. Fantastic. Had a great time. It was a great gaming experience. However, so the game was good, of course, but the whole time I'm sitting there and I'm like, God, I can't believe they did this. How did they think of that? What did they, and so, sort of just your creativity and what you did, to me at least, and I know other people, if we talked about this, sort of overpowered the gameplay, because it was just amazing what you did. Did at any point in the development that thought ever come to you that maybe the amazement or the overpowering may overpower the game? If you kind of understand where I'm going with this.
I think I do. And the short answer is no, right? Like we didn't sit back and be like, we did something big and important, or will immediately get a lot of attention or awards. Like I'm like a New England sort of puritanical, winter's coming. Hey, I did a good job. Well, you know what? The cow's got to be milked tomorrow, right? Like I don't take a lot of accolades, maybe too few for my work. But what we did notice, I was often work on multiple games at the same time, and legacy games tend to be big and they tend to go through a lot of cycles. And I think it was a combination of a playtesting system that Matt used that we sort of worked into here was part of it. But what we both noticed was we made a lot of progress quickly. Like we would play test it and people liked it and it seemed to work. And not that everything worked, and not that we didn't have to go backwards, and not that we didn't get stuck. That's normal. But we probably got stuck a lot less and seemed to have more success faster than we expected. Because I remember starting the game and then getting done and going, that took like half as long as I thought. Was it because there were two of us, or did something just click here? Like, did we just were our ideas the right people at the right time on the right product that we sort of, but I didn't think it was good. I was like, well, I don't know if this is going to do well or not, but at least it took half as much time as I thought.
Right. Well, of course, it fit both your niches, right? I mean, Pandemic was his game. You had the legacy, in your head. Right. You've done it several times. So it was just a perfect, meeting of the minds, right?
And I think what worked well was we asked each other a lot of questions about assumptions. I'd be like, oh, here's what I think how legacy games work. And he'd go, well, why? I go, well, because I tried this and that didn't work. He goes, yeah, but couldn't we do that? And I go, oh,
right.
Yeah. And it was the same thing. He'd talk about something with Pandemic, right? He'd say, well, we usually do this and we usually do that. And we did an expansion and it's like this. And I'm like, can we do that? He goes, well, we haven't. I don't know. I'm like, why? And he'd go, I don't know, right? And then we would try stuff and a lot wouldn't work. But I think we were poking at each other's assumptions of I know Pandemic and I know legacy, and therefore we know our arena. And that whole idea of my area of expertise and his area of expertise was probably gone within 2 months of starting to work together, as we very quickly learned what the other person, knew and didn't know. I mean, at the end of the day, I think by the time we got to season 0, he knew as much as how I'd think about legacy, and I knew as much as, about the underpinnings of the Pandemic system as the other person had coming into it a couple of years earlier.
Right.
But we just click as co-designers. I've worked with some co-designers who, no fault of either of ours, we just don't click, right?
Right.
Our style of working is different. Our approach to games working, and some of them have just sort of fallen away. Oh, this doesn't work. Our communication's off or something. And some work, but you go, we made a game together, but it wasn't necessarily we didn't make each other much better, just a little better. And with Matt, it just seems to be a natural sort of fit, at least right now. I mean, ask him; he may never want to work with me again. But I'm no, but I'm on the show, so I can talk this way.
There you go. No, you guys have done a fantastic job. And just as a side note, I want you to know I'm a true blue New Englander. I grew up in Connecticut, up in the northeast corner called the Quiet Corner. We were right next to Rhode Island and Massachusetts, right
near Pomfret or something like
that. That's exactly where I'm from. How do you know Pomfret?
Pomfret. There you go.
How do you know Pomfret?
Yeah, we'll talk about it. There's like a LARP thing I do there every October at the There's like a 4-H camp. Right.
Yes, I went to Pomfret School, actually. I grew up in, I can't believe
I just nailed it. It's the only town I know there. And it's because my wife and I are on staff at basically a really cool LARP. It's canceled this year. That's every first weekend in October at the 4-H camp. That's just technically south of Pomfret, I think.
Yeah, that is out of all, wow. Yeah, we have to talk about that. I'm sorry. That's unbelievable. I can't, nobody knows that town. You know what's funny is my cousin, because he was in the service in Germany, and when he knew I went to Pomfret, he called it French Fry High, because pommes frites in German is French fry. Wow, that's amazing. Okay, I'm sorry.
No. I mean, the fact that I just happened to hit the town in Connecticut that no one knows would be like
one town. I know.
Let's see if we can back it up. I grew up in a small town in central Maine. Go.
Okay, it's funny because I used to go up to Maine every single summer when I was a kid. I went to Auburn, Lewiston.
Okay.
No,
No. That's the second biggest town in Maine. Not big, but in Maine.
Right.
The answer was Waterville.
Waterville. Okay.
Which is where Colby College is. And actually, I thought we were going to get there through luck because there's a ton of summer camps around there.
Oh, okay.
The number of people I've run into are like, oh, I went to summer camp near you. And actually, Wet Hot American Summer, that movie from 20 years ago, takes place in Waterville. Like when they go into town for a really surreal sort of montage, it's Waterville. Not really. There's a sign. It doesn't look anything like it, but.
Well, it's great, and it's nice to know that you are a fellow New Englander. That's
yeah.
I absolutely love it up there. So good. Let's get back to the subject. We'll definitely talk about that more later. So it came together. You found it was a perfect collaboration between you two, but still, have you heard from a lot of people like the question that I'd had that the overpowering of just the phenomenalist, like just what you did, all that kind of stuff overpowered the gameplay. And do you think that's a good thing, or are you kind of more concerned that you wanted them to enjoy the game? Do you know what
look, you keep using great and phenomenal and overpowering, and I'm like, I'm fine with that. I don't care if it was just the box art that caused you to have that reaction or a really great sculpt, right? You bought a game and you had an experience, and that experience was fantastic. And doesn't matter which portion of it, right? Like
that's true.
Like we made a cake, and you happen to like the frosting, and other people might like the cake, right? Like it all goes together.
Right, it does. That is very true. But
I make a lot of cooking and food analogies because that's my main hobby.
Right. So. Okay. But then again, instead, so when you were play testing and you noticed that all your friends were like, wow, this is really good. This is really good. And you noticed the time went by really quick. And again, we're talking about Pandemic Legacy Season 1. Yeah. In the first one. And you noticed it was going fast because you had a great collaboration. You're both kind of experts at what you do, the cooperative and the legacy.
Yeah, we were both still surprised, to be fair.
But what I want to ask, Rob, and I want you to be honest, there had to come a point where the both of you were like, wow, I think we have something special here. Yeah?
We're both pretty close to the vest. I think we're like, this is good. I think this will do all right.
Okay.
But we still underestimate it. I don't think either of us thought we're going to put it out and this is going to be a bomb.
Right.
We're about like, not like, I don't know, maybe it finds its audience. I think some people like it. Some people find it weird. I think we're like, yeah, this should do all right. This should do pretty good, you know? Yeah, this is worth our time, right? And not because we're like oblivious to it. I think if you had asked me, and I know this back in 2009 when I was working on Risk Legacy, and my daughter remembers this. She was a young kid at the time. She's finishing college now. I was looking over proofs of it, like just had them all spread out over the bed, and she came in and what are you doing? I was looking at this game, and she asked some questions, and I remember saying, I think I did something really different and cool here. I think I have an idea, and I really changed something. Like, and I got very excited there. Like I remember when Risk Legacy was done, and then it wasn't out for like a year. I had a weird irrational fear, which I haven't had before since. I'm like, hope I don't get hit by a bus, before this comes out. I was thinking of Jonathan Larson, who died right before Rent opens.
Okay.
Right. I was like, I think I did something that people are going to think is different and cool. I think some people are going to be horrified by it, but I think a number of people are going to be like, oh, you did something interesting and unique. And I had this weird fear of, well, what would happen if I got hit by a bus and didn't see it? And it turned out to be really cool. Like, that'd be too bad. And I've never had a feeling like that. So I kind of had that about the legacy part with Risk. And then with Pandemic, it felt a little bit more, I think this is going to be good. And it turns out I had them reversed. But so I kind of had that at a different time. And Matt had lived through it with Pandemic. I mean, he had gone and been nominated for Spiel des Jahres, and he had been nominated a couple of times. So we had both sort of achieved this level of feeling like we had success in our industry. Mm-hmm. So we were able to evaluate, like, this is pretty good. I have a good feeling about this one. But we were just wrong. Like, we underestimated it. And we're very grateful that we had started season 2 before season 1 came out, because I think we would have been paralyzed. Like, if it had come out and gotten that, we would be like, well, what do we do now?
Right. To live up to the expectations, right?
Right. What did we do right? What did we do wrong? And instead we were sort of a third of the way through, and it kind of blocked it out and went, all right, this is really cool. Okay, back to season 2, right? Now, and we looked at it and said, what did we do right? What did we miss? What could we do better? Where are people liking it? Where are they not? We kind of, we found some things that we could have done better in season 1 and found some common threads for complaints, and then had time to put them into season 2 or take them out.
Right.
People, it's funny. People want, in sometimes interviews, they want a relationship like, when did you guys fight? They want all the contention. They feel like to make a game like this, it needs to have this sort of, we got in this big argument, and I argued for this, and it was crap, and then I did it, and we're all like, no, never. I mean, we'll fight for ideas. We'll both get, a 3-hour phone call. Either or both of us might at the end, like, come on, like we might get frustrated. And then very quickly, I don't know if we've both been to a lot of therapy or just good husbands or something. We're like, okay, sorry, hold on a moment. Tell me again where you're coming from. I'm sorry I got heated like that. And I'm like, oh, okay, I heard this. This is where we're disagreeing here, right? And then if we still can't agree, sometimes we'll say like, you know what? Let's just put it into testing. We have time. And we'll let the testing decide. And inevitably, if something works or doesn't work, the person was wrong goes, oh yeah, I was wrong. Good call. Yeah, and we just move on.
That's true. You just move on. Now, another thing you initially told me, like when we started talking, you said that you had apprehensions because you were like, how could a legacy game work in a cooperative game? So you had a little apprehension at first. Now, one of my kind of concerns or questions about cooperative games, I'd like to know your thoughts on this, is that the alpha player, which we all know what that's about. And in case people who are watching do not know what an alpha player, what that refers to is somebody who kind of takes over the game, who just makes all the decisions, do all this kind of stuff. Now, in a fully cooperative game with 100% information, not sort of hidden, like Hanabi, right, has like not perfect information or things like that, or like the mind or, the game, things like that. But with Pandemic, there's perfect information. All of it's out there. So each turn, there essentially is going to be the correct play or the optimal play.
You sound like you're an alpha player when you talk that way.
No, because I don't play cooperative games. I don't like them because of that. Right or not?
I think, well, there's a couple different ways to answer this.
Okay.
We did talk about it.
Yeah.
I've heard Matt say, like, what happens if you play with people who are alpha player? And Matt has said very tongue-in-cheek, we'll just find better friends.
No, but come on.
So it's a facile answer, right? But it's true. There's certain people who have certain styles of gaming that don't mesh with people. Right. So I watch people who are very much like, yeah, I would do it this way, but it's your turn. I want to do it that way. Yeah, okay. We'll see how it turns out. Two, when designing things, you try to make it that you could do A, B, or C, and you don't necessarily know which is the best one. And sometimes you just are playing odds, and sometimes you think something's more important. Like, I think we need to prioritize removing those disease cubes from the board because I think we're due for an epidemic card, and that's going to be a problem. And someone says, I think we have an extra turn or two, and we should do this instead because that's more important.
True.
Depending on how that deck goes, one of them is right.
Correct. And I think you did add a little bit more of that into the legacy game of, as you mentioned, the A, B, or C. I think there were, yeah.
And the third thing, which we feel like a legacy game sort of takes care of a little bit, is often an alpha player, someone who's played the game more and has a level of mastery. Hey, okay, you haven't played this much, so let me tell you. It's really important we manage that and don't get distracted by this. And they start telling you, it's not necessarily the optimal, this is the best move right now, but basically I played this enough to have a strategy that is a winning strategy, and therefore I'm going to explain it to you to be helpful, but really you're playing the game. With a legacy game, you get new rules like every month, which makes it that technically no one has mastered that current rule set. Everyone is experiencing that rule set at the same time. So if you play Pandemic Legacy like 5 times and you're playing with a new group, you could alpha game it a lot more. You'd be like, well, hold on, in May this happens, and in July that happens, and we need to be prepared for this now. But if everyone's going through it at the same time, then, the person who's a little bit mathier might be like, no, we're okay. We're not going to get an epidemic for a couple turns. And the person who's more long focused might be like, let's not forget, we need to get these cards together. But hopefully no one has completely mastered the rule set immediately, and then the rest of the table has no idea. But I still like to find better friends, even though that's just punting the decision away. I mean, it's also the type of thing that, like, you don't play cooperative games because you don't like that. There's lots of games out there.
There are.
Yeah, and it's like I don't like real-time games for the most part. I just don't enjoy them. I get stressful, and I don't think they're fun. And part of what I like playing Buzz, thinking about my turn and seeing what you're doing, even if I get, I can't believe you did that, and I gotta change my plans. And in real time, I don't enjoy them as much because I don't have these moments to savor what I'm going to do or react to stuff. I will play them. Sometimes I'll even design them. I just don't play them as much. So, there's plenty of games. So if some people feel like the alpha gamer is a real problem in a co-op, or a particular co-op, or a particular player per co-op, like there are 10,000 other games you can pick.
That is true.
Where that won't hit it, which is one of the things I like about the industry. I mean, I've had people come up and say, I don't like what you did with legacy games. I don't like one-time play. And I'm like, play something else. I'm sorry. Like, I don't like lobster despite being from Maine. Like, more for you.
You're not a true New Englander, Rob.
I love that. I say that
right now.
I say that because it bothers people so much. I'm like, I'm not taking it away from you. I'm not banning lobster. I just find it an overrated piece of protein.
You're not really from New England. Who are you?
I didn't grow up on the coast.
You don't like lobster.
I like blueberries and potatoes. Those were closer to where I grew.
So I got to ask you, you must like Ipswich clams. You got to like clams with the bellies, not just the strips, right?
I actually don't care much for shellfish or bivalves at all. Like I eat fish, right? And sometimes I will eat lobster. I'm just like, oh, this wasn't worth the price,
right?
but I eat shrimp, and I'm like, I don't understand why people eat this. Like, people love like a big cocktail shrimp platter with the cocktail sauce, and people are like, I could eat that whole thing myself. I'm like, that's what a judge would sentence me to. It's like a week in jail, or you finish that. And I'm like, it's going to take me a week to get let's just skip that. But
yeah, some people's one cup of coffee is another's cup of tea, right?
Yeah, and like I love coffee, and tea hurts my stomach, which is weird because that's not what tea's supposed to do. But my wife, if I walk by her with a cup of coffee, she's like, "Get that away from me!" Right?
So you grew up in Waterville, Maine, and but so I want to talk a little bit about you growing up in your life and all that kind of stuff. We're going to come back to pandemic, of course, and the legacy season and all your history with the gaming. So what kind of games did you play when you were a kid? Because like I said, every summer I used to go up to Auburn, Lewiston, and stay on Lake Auburn. We had a little camp up there, and we used to play like Landslide. We played that to death, and Monopoly and all that kind of stuff. What kind of games did you play when you were a kid?
Well, up until I went to summer camp myself at age 11 on Lake Capasacanti, I played Chutes and Ladders, Monopoly, Scrabble. If they had Uno, I think they did. I played Uno and Mastermind, and basically anything you get in the 70s a kid. And I played Ganip, if you want to get a little fancy. And my grandmother had some games. She had a whole bunch of kids, like French Catholic family. So my uncles weren't that much older than me. So she still had games in the house from when I was very young. They were like teenagers or going to college. So I would play some over there, and I probably don't remember all of them. But I didn't think I was destined for like a career in game design. I liked them, but I didn't have a strong passion. But then I went off to summer camp in 1981 at age 11, and I discovered Dungeons and Dragons, and that I fell in love with. Okay. Right? I fell in love with role-playing games, narrative, which is obvious if you look at legacy games. I mean, the role-playing games smushed into board game form.
Yep.
And then that kindled my love of any game that could tell a story. So I would find some more strategic games, or Dark Tower was out around then, or games like a card game called Dragon Master, which was just a trick-taking game, but it said Dragon Master on it. So therefore I wanted to buy it because I was into dragons. And my love of games really was my love of role-playing games, which expanded into a love of board games. But I didn't plan on becoming a board game designer. At age 28, I wanted to be a role-playing writer on the side. I was an advertising writer, and I'm like, well, I'll just do like Fridays. I'll do role-playing because it's hard to make a living at it. I mean, it's hard to make a living at board game design unless you get fortunate like I did. But
what did you go to school for then?
Classical civilizations and a minor in medieval history. I was going to be a television comedy writer. I mean, we skipped that part.
Okay, working for Monty Python.
Saturday Night Live. Saturday Night Live was
Saturday Night Live. Okay.
Or maybe writing for Letterman. Would have worked out. Sketch comedy was huge in the early 90s. There was the State and a whole bunch of other people, and Kids in the Hall. So I probably could have made a career, but I didn't really like TV as an industry. I liked comedy writing as a hobby, but I think there's a lot of people go into comedy writing and end up very burnt out, or everything gets snarky. So I think I'm glad I didn't do it. But anyway, I saw an ad for Hasbro who was looking for a copywriter. I'm like, well, I want to get into role playing, but maybe I can start writing stuff for board games, like rules or something. And it just turned out it's a long story, but I got lucky that they're actually looking for a writer and a bunch of other positions. And so they ended up interviewing me also for a sort of game designer / writer.
Okay.
They're like, well, we could have you for this, but your resume and your cover letter looked like you might fit this, so we're going to interview you for that job as well. And I'm like, that's the job I want. That's game design. That's board game design.
Right.
I'm like, that sounds cool. And
so
then
now,
I got the job. So
very good. So now, at your core, because I guess that's what you went to school for, and you said you wanted to write the role playing thing. So would you say one of the main things about Rob Daviau is you're a writer? Is that like one of the first couple of things you would use?
I would say that I'm a storyteller.
A storyteller, okay.
Right, or experience designer. Like, I want to basically have you show up and I kind of communicate something, whether I'm being a DM and talking, whether you're reading something I wrote, whether you're playing a board game that I designed that actually doesn't have a lot of story or writing,
right.
Or whether I was doing a radio commercial when I was in advertising, or writing a comedy sketch, which is I want to kind of set up a premise, take you through a journey, and at the end, you either laughed or want to buy the mattress I was selling, or had a good game, or had an adventure and your character leveled up. I basically I kind of feel like in some ways I'm a traveling like campfire, just going around trying to tell stories to people and give them, entertaining experiences. And so all of my jobs, and it's one of those things you in hindsight,
right?
You're like, how did I end up with all these jobs? You're like, oh, all of them were about, let me sit you down and tell you a story in some way.
Right. So the position at Hasbro, it just couldn't have been more perfect for you.
I was training for that job my whole life.
Right.
As I put it, I'm like, wow, I got really lucky. I got that job. And then I look back years later and I went, no, I had that. Wow, I really, as a hobby or as a job or as a school classes, did everything to be qualified for that job without knowing.
Right, exactly. So good. So now we're at Hasbro, and so you felt that all of a sudden, here's the position you're in. You're becoming a storyteller. You can do the games. Everything is what you've trained for to get to this point. So what were the early days like at Hasbro? How did from walking into the door at day one, did you develop from that point? Tell us a little about the Hasbro story.
Day one, I beat up the toughest guy there to sort of let everyone know I was a force to be reckoned with.
It's me, Rob. I'm here.
Yeah, I'm here. All right, this is how it's done. No, it was the Parker Brothers building on the North Shore of Boston, sort of, between the Boston and the New Hampshire border near Salem, for people who don't know that area. And I was just so happy to be there and so happy to be out of it. It was a dream come true. I remember pulling up and seeing like the Parker Brothers sign, and it was fall in New England, and it was this windy road with leaves falling down. And not only did I almost cry then, I could almost cry now just thinking about what a wonderful feeling it was that I was hired to drive and just make, gifts to go under Christmas trees or birthday parties or things to be played on family vacations. Right. And I like playing more complicated games, but I've never been a snob about that. If someone's like, well, make a game for a 6-year-old, I'm like, cool. Right. You're not going to want to play it at 40 unless you got a 6-year-old kid and you can enjoy it. I'm just going to make something that's fun for a kid.
Right.
And I've always tried to maintain that. Like there's this, I think, attitude in the more hobby games, like, well, that's not a real game, or that game isn't real because it's too simple. I'm like, you're not 6. And I loved it. And that feeling really didn't go away. And then what happened was I was there for about 9 or 10 months, and parts of it were wonderful, parts of it were blur, because I also became a dad right in the middle of that. Right. So I had some paternity leave and I was sleep deprived, and, it was just sort of like, what's going on? And I never was there long enough to feel like I had solved it, or I was tired of this politics, or that guy's kind of a jerk. Because what happened was, about 10 months in, the company decided they were moving to Western Massachusetts, to the Milton Bradley location. And there's a long, boring, kind of grubby story about that. And I was like, well, if I go to Western Massachusetts, I can buy a house. I've got a young kid. I can't buy a house in Boston. I really like this job. and I'll move out to Milton Bradley. So I was only at the Parker Brothers place for about 16 months. And I think because I left after 16 months, it always has this very special place in my heart of sort of the perfect corporate game design job. It made, in fact, like just in one sense, the perfect job. I love working for myself, but it was just wonderful to sort of have that. And then I ended up at the Milton Bradley place where I was there for the next 11 years.
But you were essentially still for the same company, correct?
Yeah, it was weird. Technically, it was the same company.
Okay.
But some people didn't make the move. New management came in, and the corporate culture was different.
I see. Okay.
And the Milton Bradley place was attached to an active factory. And it was very interesting to get a front row seat, uncomfortable at times between the office salaried employed and then the unionized factory shift worker employees who shared a cafeteria but at different spaces. And they tried very hard to make some rules the same to not show differences, but then some rules had to be different. And it was very interesting to sort of walk into that situation where, if you're a factory worker and you're a shift worker and you're on the line, you can't roll into work 5 or 10 minutes late. The line can't start. So they very much value being on time, and lunch breaks are very regulated. You're a game designer and you come 10 minutes late but you work through lunch. Like it's much different, but they would try to basically make the office workers as regimented as the factory workers, which wasn't the case at Parker Brothers. And there were just like lots of instances like this. And the building was older and it was kind of grubby. It was like working in a bunker. So there was a real shift for me, and maybe it was also I'd been doing it 15 months. So at that point it would have felt like a job, but I always liked both jobs. But Parker Brothers is sort of magical, and Milton Bradley became a little bit like, this is a good job. This is a good job. And, was there for like 11 years.
Yeah. And you're a new dad, raising a family, getting
a new dad, and I had a house and
Yeah,
did some stuff. And, I'm still in Western Massachusetts. In 2011, they decided to move the games headquarters into Rhode Island,
Okay.
Down in Pawtucket. And my kids were both relatively young then. I'd had a second kid. I'd also gotten divorced and was basically getting remarried the week the office was moving.
Oh, wow. And
I wasn't going to move because my ex-wife wasn't going to move the family. I didn't want to move the family to Rhode Island. And so my new wife and I, we both work for Hasbro, and we work together now. Mm-hmm. Drove back and forth and had an apartment down in Rhode Island. It was just sort of this long year where we were constantly on a business trip, like 4 days at home with the kids and then 4 days in Pawtucket or Providence really. And back and I'm like, I can't do this. So ended up setting out on my own, and it was a lot of work, and I, own my own business. So I work weekends and I work nights, and, you always worry about payroll and things like that. But I really do like working for myself a lot. I was never a corporate guy. I was very bad at office politics. I'd be better now at age 50, but Rob at age 32 thought, how you move up and get a promotion? Just be sarcastic, and then people will think that's funny and give you a promotion. I was just so bad at it.
So let me ask you a little bit about the office politics, because I'm trying to figure out, during your time at Hasbro, of course, you made a lot of games. Now, were you strictly an employee and you just got a salary depending on how many games sold? Like you never got a piece of royalty and all that kind of stuff?
I didn't even know how many games were sold.
Okay, but you did get like credit, right? Because your name,
sort of.
Your name is on games, yeah.
My name is on one, I think just Risk Legacy. Okay. Maybe one other, but I can't remember. They didn't like to put designers' names on the box.
All right.
They just wanted you to be, they want to create haves and have-nots and then argue, because a lot of it was very collaborative.
Yep.
Who's the designer? And 6 of us work together. And Hasbro also gets a lot of games in from outside inventors who get a royalty. Mm-hmm. And then sometimes that game is almost completely redesigned by an internal designer. So if the designer, like it gives you a good idea, like, oh, this is a good idea. Like being a company that does toys and games and for kids, sometimes, all you keep is, oh, there's a water bottle in the middle. That's really cool. And then you build the whole game around it. Who gets the credit on the box? It can get kind of messy. So by and large, I didn't get credit. I didn't get royalties. There's games I made in 2000 that are still in print that I'd love to own or get a royalty on. But then 2 or 3 years, I didn't get anything into the shelves, and I still got the same salary. So it You weren't motivated by making more money for games. You just wanted the fun games.
Right.
And that was there. And, you know, and I did leave Hasbro going, oh, I want to own something. I want to have a piece of something. And if it does well, then I make more money, knowing that if it doesn't do well, I make no money and just wasted my time. And I'm still okay with that. But I got paid for like 14 years to learn how to make games with no pressure on keeping a roof over my head during that time. So it was great. And yeah, there's like 3 or 4 games out of that whole time that I would have like, ooh, I wish I owned that. But there's also about 60 that I'm like, well, okay.
Yeah, I can definitely see the balance, like you said, because you're guaranteed to pay. You got, whether it was successful or not, you're just still working, getting paid to play games. So I definitely see that. But now with the Risk Legacy, so how did all of a sudden you get your name on that? And the question is, do you own any of that now at all, or is that
I own none of it? I don't even know if it's in print.
Oh, so you have zero to do with that. You have no rights or anything.
I have no rights, no visibility, no knowledge. They can do with it what they want. They can cancel it. They can redo it. They can take my name off the box.
Okay, but now let me ask you something, because since it probably doesn't equate to, say, a song like music rights. So since you developed Risk Legacy as an employee of the company, they, like, you have all of, and I guess it's thought, right? So you can't really copyright thought, but you can take that Risk Legacy mechanic, which you have, the legacy, and you obviously could take it and do other things with it, right? So it wasn't the company's.
Yeah, it gets a little complicated between patents, trademarks, and copyrights.
Okay.
The copyright of Risk Legacy, which is the graphics, the names, the art, all the writing, is owned outright by Hasbro, and that's very clear.
Yep.
Right. Copyright's the easiest thing to get, is clear. The term legacy was not trademarked because it couldn't be. It was going to be called Risk Evolution, Risk Revolution, Risk Legacy. Like, we were looking at what system it would be, and none of the names we could come up with were trademarkable because other people had used them. But at the same time, because so many people had used them, they weren't protected. So legacy is a very generic term. Anyone can use it. People were using it before I did stuff. People are using them now, not to mean a legacy game. There was like Legacy of Dragonholt is kind of a legacy game that Fantasy Flight or Z-Man did, but not really. Like, people use it in different ways. So there's nothing trademarked in the game. And then the bottom line is, you know, was anything patented? You can't patent something once it's out. And when it was developed, my boss at the time thought there was something to be patented there, and he tried to push the ball up the hill a couple times to get Hasbro to patent it. And Hasbro's lawyers are like, there's nothing innovative here, because they were toy people and they're looking for a mechanism or a launcher or a magnet. Now, I thought there was a good chance I was leaving Hasbro in the next year or two, and there was going to be a move, and I was right. So I wasn't really pushing for it to be patented. So like, after it, like, you're like, well, this should be patented. I'm like, it's fine. Like, other people could do it. I'm like, oh, okay. So I ultimately got pushed up, and I did what I was asked to do to push it up. And I made the video and explained why it should be patented. And then when they didn't, I was like, okay, good. I think that's good for me. I think it's bad for Hasbro, because if I leave, I'd like to keep making these because I think there's something there. And I just got lucky, like those Hasbro lawyers. And maybe there wasn't anything patentable. Maybe the lawyers just thought it is hard to patent things, and it's hard to patent abstract concepts like that, because gameplay in general is not protectable, which is why Words with Friends can knock off Scrabble, and there's all those Monopoly knockoffs and stuff like that. You can't really protect how you play a game, and in a legal sense,
right?
So I think they looked at it and said, this is just how to play a game. There's nothing, you know. I have a patent, or from Hasbro, or Hasbro has a patent. I had to sell it to him for $1, which was part of my contract.
Oh, okay. So now,
which involves like DVDs and red readers and things that no one's going to use, but I did get a patent. Right.
So did Betrayal come out at Hasbro?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So then that also has your name on it, but it also has like 4 or 5 or 6 other names on it as well.
Yeah, I can break that down for you. The original game, the Avalon Hill brand was at Hasbro when I was there, and the game came in from a guy, Dr. Bruce Glasgow. He's a professor down in Tennessee, DC area somewhere, Virginia, I think. And he had submitted to the original Avalon Hill before Hasbro bought him. and then it got moved over to my desk. And I just thought it was a wonderful game. It was very different from the game that you see right now. And I'd love to see someone do an article sometime where they take his prototype and my prototype and the final game and the revised game and show like really how a game changes during design and development. I loved it. I thought it was amazing. And I started working on how it could be a little bit more accessible. It was a little bit less storytelling and a little more strategic. Like room tiles weren't off the top of the stack. You had a hand of them. So you're like, oh, the kitchen's over here. And then you would play a kitchen. And there was a whole bunch of things that were different. There wasn't separate trader books. There was always a hidden trader at the beginning. There were things that were different. And so I spent a bunch of time for about a year turning that idea into largely the game that's out today. I sometimes say I did extensive development work. Sometimes I feel like I did second design on it. But I mean, Bruce Glasgow's the designer and he owns it and he gets the royalties. Okay. I fell somewhere in between extensive development and slight design. But I also knew towards the end that Avalon Hill had gone to Wizards of the Coast. I probably wasn't going to keep it. It was sort of like, how do I make this a Parker Brothers game? And it was like, I knew it needed a lot of development work at the end. And then, in fact, it did go over to Avalon Hill. Kind of broke my heart because I had spent like 15 months working on it almost every day. Right. Then Mike Selinker and his team, and the rest of the names are the people you see, which was the development team at Wizards of the Coast. And they finished the development on it. They sort of took my rules and streamlined them. I made it a little too bloated and removed some stuff and did the final writing and editing and haunt testing. So,
okay.
In my mind, they did the development and editing pass. I think they made a couple, light design elements in there, but I would say that 60% of the design was Bruce Glasgow, including the very, very amazing idea of a haunt and exploring a haunted house and a traitor and the asymmetric victory condition, which I never would have thought of.
Right. Okay.
Some of taking that and making it a little more accessible to casual players, like 35% of the design was me in there and blocking out all the haunts and all 50 and things like that. And then the last 5% goes to Mike's team in terms of design, but actually getting it to all work together and be consistent is a big thing. It's just, you're trying to break out design, development, writing, tuning, polishing, editing. So yeah, I say there's a lot of names in there and any one of us will say, I did like 2/3 of it, but I also say it's a very big game and we probably all deserve 2/3 the credit, even if the math doesn't hold up.
Right, but it's nice. Thank you for explaining the lineage, right? It's really nice to see the lineage of that because I've always wondered because I've met a couple of them. Oh, I designed Betrayal. I'm like, wow, and I was like, oh, you did, and then I was like, wow, there's 5 or 6. Like, I want to know how that works. So I'm glad.
Yeah, I don't know exactly. There's like 4 people. I know Mike, and then a team of people on there who got the very tough job of taking this and a very short deadline of saying, make this something that can come out and hold together.
Right.
So I think they poured 4 people onto it, and I think they deserve to have their name in the book as contributing to it. I don't know exactly what they did or who did what or how they made it work. Or I still have the prototype, physical prototype of the one I turned over to Avalon Hill in my basement, and I take it out and look at it. I don't take it out and look at it like longingly. Sometimes someone's around, like pre-COVID, and it's like, hey, do you have that? And I'll take it out and look at it. Like once every couple of years, someone wants to see it. And it mostly plays the same. I had this idea at the time of a couple things. One was points, like you got points at the end. Whoever had the most points wins. So even if you did some cool stuff and found some things and fought the monster and died, you might still win over someone who just hid and then did the killing blow. And one of the things Mike Groups does is it's a movie. The good guys win or the bad guys win.
Okay. So let me ask you something now. Since you've had several positions, because this kind of brought this up when we're talking about this, how the Betrayal came to be. So since you've had pretty much all the positions in gaming, because now you're also a CEO or the higher up of your company, the Restoration Games. You're a designer. You actually worked for a company like Hasbro. You had somebody's game like Betrayal from Bruce Glasgow and developed it. If I'm going to try to put you in a corner here now, Rob. Now, of course, somebody has to come with a prototype with the game. But after that point, can you kind of maybe let us know 1, 2, 3, the most important steps next before it actually comes out as a game? Maybe, if you're able?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you the things that people don't think of.
Okay.
I think a lot of people want to design games or play games, think of how does a game play? Right? Like I take it out, I read the rules, here's how it plays, and I judge like I liked it, I didn't like it. As a publisher, you have to get, and as a developer, you have to put on the fact that this is going to be a product on a shelf that someone has to want to buy, understand how to buy, and that the publisher at the end of the day needs to make money on. And that affects a great deal of the decisions that come from that come after the game is finished. Right? If you come to me and you're like, I've got this game, it takes 20 minutes to play, it's for kids, and it has 400 cards and retails for $120. Well, then you might have a great game, but you got a horrible product.
Right.
Right. So I think a lot of the decisions that come after are certainly not linear, but you want to get a bill of materials, and then you want to get quotes from factories, and you want to look at the price you want to hit, and you want to look at the name, and you want to figure out what art would fit there and where you're going to spend your money on art, and does it need plastics or not plastics. You want to look at the playtime versus the price point. As I was saying before, if I charge you $10 for a card game that somehow lasts 5 or 6 hours, you either say you're getting great value, or you go, I signed up for a little card game, right? Why is this still happening? Similarly, if I charge $100 for a game and it takes 5 minutes, but setup is 30 minutes, you're like, what just happened? I just spent more time setting it up than playing. And I think you have to look at, 2-player, 3-player. Can you get to 5-player? Is there a solo play? Is this game like other games that are in the market? How do we differentiate it between them? Because I often ask designers when they have a game, picture in your head the person who would play your game right now, and what's their favorite game? What game is this sort of based on? Saying like, well, if you like, I'll pick one everyone knows. Oh, if you like Settlers of Catan, you'll like this because. And I said, and once you do that, tell me why they're going to pick your game over that game that they like so much. And a lot of times we're like, oh, I've never thought of that. I don't know. I'm like, it's like if I love, game A, and you say my game's like game A,
right?
I'm like, well, I love game A. Why your game? They're like, it's like game A. I'm like, I already know how to play it. I already bought it. It's already on my shelf. But if you can say it's kind of like this, but
That's a really good point.
It has a really good 2-player version, which game A doesn't have. And I go, oh, you know what? That's true. I never play game A because it needs 4 people. And often it's just my wife and me. Go on. You have my interest. And then you tell me the theme is septic systems. And I go, okay, now, no, maybe you lost me again. Right.
Are you thinking of the old game Pipe Works right there?
I mean, whatever it is. I was just trying to think of something that was both kind of, not fun to play and yet not offensive. But sometimes then like, okay, well, we can change the theme. And they're like, well, it's got 900 cards and each one needs exquisite art. And you're like, well, I'm not paying for 900 pieces of art because the game's $30 and it won't make money. So these are the questions you ask once you get to a publisher. And if you're a designer and you are thinking of some of them, I think you have a better chance of your game being bought because, you can go to the publisher and say, my game's like this, but it's like that. It has 15 pieces of art. I think it's about a $40 or $50 game. Here's the bill of materials as we have it right now. And the publisher's like, you just did the first month of my life after I take your game. Thank you.
Right. So now let me ask you though, Rob. So because restoration games, because I looked, I thought it was the Unmatched and the Dinosaur Tea Party were the only ones that I saw that were not reprints or.
No, they're reprints. They're all reprints.
Dinosaur
Tea Party was a game called Who's It? And Unmatched was based on a game called Star Wars Epic Duels, where any Star Wars character could fight any other. That actually I was one of the co-designers on in 2002.
Oh, okay.
So I brought back a game I had a hand in.
Right. So restoration, and again, we're running short on time, so we don't have a whole lot to. But I wanted to ask because restoration games again does games that were already kind of made, you tweaked and brought them back to the market. But what you said now, so as a designer. Is it better for you, easier for you to get and make a game? And since you know the back end, all that kind of stuff, what you were just talking about, what a publisher has to do, is it better for you to just say, okay, boom, now you go? Because that's a lot of work after the fact, right?
I like seeing things through to completion. Like okay. Yeah, I like being a publisher. I like self-publishing. I like being a designer. I think a lot of what makes a game sing is not just the gameplay. It's a product. It's an experience, right? And I've seen good games get bad art. or bad names or something, and you're like, there was a good game there, but at the end you hit it. You didn't elevate it with your, your sort of art and all the things that came after. You kind of made it hard for people to get to it. Your illustrations in the book made it hard to understand the rules. Your pack out made people not kind of mad from the moment they opened the box. And so I try to be maybe a little too controlling with the publisher. I like saying, I'm like, here's the pack out, here's the bill of materials. I've thought this through, which they generally seem happy with. And sometimes they're like, okay, thank you, we got it. And sometimes they do a better job. I think they're grateful that I think of it. The problem that faces me as a designer sometimes is I'm thinking so much of the end product that I might put up barriers in my head of, oh, we can't do that because of cost, or we can't do that because of marketing. And I miss the opportunity to do something really different, right? I think some people through ignorance would be like, I have this game with 500 cards. And you're like, well, that shouldn't work, but somehow it does. Because you didn't realize it didn't work, you managed to find something really interesting that I never would have thought of, right? Mm-hmm. And I have to be careful at age 50 and having done this for 22 years not to be like, I know how it's done. You do this, you have a lunch, you do that, you got a game, right? And I don't. I still feel like every game I make, I'm like, how could I mess this up again? Like, you'd think I know how to make one of these by now.
Yeah, but so here is what I want to ask you about, because I wrote something down that you had said quite a while ago, and you had said that if somebody came to you and said, hey, I want a game for a 6-year-old, and you're like, okay, great, I'll make a game for a 6-year-old. But since we talked about how you essentially consider yourself a storyteller, and that's part of your being, who Rob Daviau is, and that's why you've become so successful and so good at what you do. So can a game be as good if it comes straight from you, or if somebody comes to you and says, make this? You kind of
either way. I like it straight. It's like you just said, 6-year-old game. I'm like, okay, can't really have reading because they don't know how to read. Each card has to have one word or something. The whole game needs to be 25 minutes. And it needs to have a fun theme. Like I start there with a 6-year-old. I'm like, you got a cannon full of bees that you're shooting at a ghost, right? Like, yeah, I mean, just like you have to be slightly nonsensical, and you tell that to a 6-year-old, like, oh, I got a bee cannon and I'm shooting at a ghost. Cool, I'm in. And you said it to an adult, you're like, what? Why do I have a cannon full of bees? Do I have to reload it? Like, that doesn't seem practical.
Right. But I mean, what I'm wondering is because, like, say a musician, right, a songwriter, they have an experience in their life. They have a relationship. Somebody dies or something. So, like, they all of a sudden come up with a song. They say, "Oh, I wrote it in 5 minutes," because it came from their soul, as opposed to a car company coming and saying, "Hey," or a movie say, "Hey, come and write a theme song for this movie."
Yeah, like they're all a little different. I do need to go. I'm sorry to say, I mean, I have
no, I understand. Yeah,
I have another obligation. Yeah, so I find inspiration happens in weird times, right? Sometimes you work on a game and you're like, oh, someone asked me to do this and I'm kind of fighting it and it's not really working. But if you just get in the middle and go, I don't know what we need. We need a octopus umbrella, right? You just like, you're like, oh, and you're like, oh, wait, no, hold on. And then you like basically make it your own and make it fun. And sometimes it is inspiration and things. There's many ways to get creativity. It's very rarely, although I had it with Legacy, a bolt from the blue, boom, here's an idea.
Right.
Most of the time it's a series of, what would make this better? What would make this better? And you just do that enough and you have something good.
Right. Very good. So, folks, yes, we have so much more to talk about, but we do have a time constraint here. But so lastly, Rob, thank you so much for the time. I really appreciate it. But before we go, if you could, please just let the audience know where they can find you. For example, your Twitter, Instagram, website,
sure,
Facebook, and all that kind of stuff.
Sure. Because my name is it's right here. This camera's reversed, so I can't do it. There it is. You just go to @RobDaviau on Twitter is where you'll find me. I don't really have an Instagram or a Facebook. If you go to robdaviau.com, you can see my outdated website, which is overdue for updating. You can also go to Restoration Games, which is one of my two companies, and you can see what we're up to over there. And you can follow Restoration Games on Twitter. It's @Restoration Game. We left the last S off because that's as long as Twitter names can be.
Oh, I see. Okay. All right, perfect. Well, thank you so much. And folks, just remember, look forward for Pandemic Legacy Season 0 coming out. And I'm sure we have a lot of other great things to look out coming out from Restoration Games. But perhaps in the future, we can go ahead and have another interview and continue our conversation. But again, Rob, thank you so much for joining us, and I really appreciate it.
All right. Thank you for having me. Sorry, I have to go.
I understand. Take care.
All right. Bye.
Thank you, folks, and thank you for joining us for another episode of Meepleville Meets. We just had Rob Daviau. We are under a time constraint because he is a very busy man, as you can tell. So we will hopefully get him back in another time to finish another interview. But again, we'll see you again soon, and thank you for joining us here on Meepleville Meets.